Blood splattered across marble floors as a police chief's hand struck a black woman's face in open court, cameras rolling, the world watching. What he didn't know: the woman he brutalized wasn't helpless. She was the one person who could destroy everything he'd built. This is the story of how one act of hatred ignited a revolution that brought a corrupt empire to its knees. Stay until the end, you won't believe what happens. Comment your city below so I can see how far this truth travels. The morning air in Atlanta hung thick with humidity and tension, the kind that clings to your skin and makes you feel like the city itself is holding its breath. It was 7:47 a.m. on a Tuesday that would fracture the nation's conscience, though no one knew it yet. The federal courthouse on Ted Turner Drive stood like a monument to justice, all polished granite and towering columns. But monuments, Dr. Celeste Morgan had learned in her 23 years of law enforcement, were just pretty lies carved in stone. She stepped out of her modest sedan, a simple black blazer over a white blouse, her natural hair pulled back in a professional bun. At 46, Celeste carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who'd fought too many battles to waste energy on swagger. Her dark eyes swept the courthouse steps, cataloging everything with the trained precision that had made her one of the most decorated federal investigators in the country's history. What she saw made her jaw tighten. A line of citizens, mostly black and brown faces, snaked down the courthouse steps, herded like cattle by uniformed officers whose body language screamed contempt. At the top of the steps, 3 officers stood blocking the entrance. Their arms crossed their faces, twisted with sneers that Celeste had seen 1,000 times before. "Move it along, sweetheart," one of them barked at an elderly black woman struggling with her walker. "We ain't got all day for you people." The woman, who couldn't have been younger than 70, fumbled with her papers, her hands shaking. "I'm sorry, sir. I just need to find my—" "I said move." Plotted narrative progression with emotional depth and tension. Good start. I need to keep building the tension. Introduce more dialogue, show the systemic harassment, and introduce the live streamer. Let me continue with more emotional depth and dialogue. The officer, his nameplate read. Murphy shoved the walker aside, sending the elderly woman stumbling. Papers scattered across the marble steps like autumn leaves. The woman fell to her knees, a small cry escaping her lips. No one moved to help her. Celeste felt her pulse quicken, but she kept walking, kept her face neutral. Not yet, she told herself. Document first. Act when necessary. A young man in his early 20s, wearing a faded hoodie and holding up his phone, stood off to the side, live streaming the entire scene. His voice carried over the morning air. "Y'all seeing this? This is what passes for justice in Atlanta. Elder abuse on the courthouse steps. I'm at the federal building right now, and these officers out here treating our people like criminals before they even get through the door." Celeste glanced at the phone screen as she passed. Already 847 viewers. The comment section scrolled by in a blur of outrage and despair. "Ayo, watch yourself, boy," Murphy called out to the live streamer. "You filming without permission? That's a crime. Public space, public servants." The young man shot back, though his voice wavered slightly. "First Amendment Officer Murphy, unless that badge means the Constitution doesn't apply to you." Murphy's face reddened. His hand moved to his baton. "Marcus," another officer warned in a low voice. "Not worth it. Cameras everywhere." Marcus Murphy glared, but stepped back, his jaw working like he was chewing on words too vile to release. Celeste joined the line, positioning herself behind a middle-aged Latino man, clutching a briefcase, and a young black mother with 2 small children clinging to her legs. The children's eyes were wide with fear, their small hands gripping their mother's worn dress. "Mama, why are those men so mean?" the little girl whispered. "Hush now, baby. Just keep your head down and stay close." The line moved with agonizing slowness. Every few minutes, an officer would bark an order, and someone would scramble to comply, producing ID faster. Stepping aside for a random search, emptying pockets onto a folding table, where hands wearing latex gloves would rifle through personal belongings with theatrical disgust. "What's this?" an officer said, holding up a man's medication bottle. "You got a prescription for this, or you just another drug dealer trying to use the court to beat a case?" "That's my heart medication," the man said quietly, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "The prescription label is right there on the bottle." "You talking back to me?" "No, sir. You just what?" The man's shoulders slumped. "Nothing, sir." Celeste watched it all, her mind recording every detail like a camera. The casual cruelty, the deliberate humiliation, the way power corrupted even the smallest interactions when there was a uniform involved and no accountability in sight. She'd seen it in 100 cities, in 1,000 different forms. But seeing it and experiencing it were two different things, and today, Celeste had chosen to experience it. Not as Deputy Director of the Federal Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. Not as Dr. Celeste Morgan, whose face had graced the covers of law journals and whose testimony before Congress had brought down corrupt police departments from Boston to Los Angeles. Today, she was just another black woman in line waiting to see if justice would deign to notice her. The young mother in front of her finally reached the entrance. Her children clutched at her legs, their small faces pressed into the fabric of her dress. "ID," the officer demanded without looking up. The woman fumbled with her purse, her hands shaking. "Yes, sir, I have it right here." "Hurry up, we ain't got all day." "I'm sorry, You just what?" "Too stupid to find your own ID. You know how to read." The words hit like slaps. The woman's face flushed with shame and anger, but she bit her lip and produced her driver's license with trembling fingers. The officer Daniels, according to his nameplate, took the ID and held it up to the light, squinting at it with exaggerated suspicion. "This look fake to you, Murphy?" Murphy ambled over his boots, heavy on the marble. "Everything about these people looks fake to me. Fake IDs, fake addresses, fake innocent act, all of it." "It's real," the woman said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, I just need to get inside. My custody hearing is at 8:30. "Custody hearing?" Daniels laughed, a sound like gravel in a garbage disposal. "Let me guess. Baby daddy finally wised up and realized you ain't fit to raise his kids." The little girl started to cry. "Please," the mother begged. "Don't do this in front of my children. Don't do what my job." Daniels thrust the ID back at her. "You're telling me how to do my job now. You know what I think you need to step aside for additional screening. You and your kids right over there by that wall." "But my hearing. Should have thought about that before you copped an attitude." Celeste felt something snap inside her chest, a wire pulled too tight for too long. She stepped forward. "Excuse me, Officer Daniels?" Her voice cut through the morning air like a blade calm measured, but carrying a weight that made both officers turn to look at her. "This woman has done nothing wrong," Celeste continued, her eyes locked on Daniels. "She produced valid identification, she's been respectful, and she has small children who are clearly distressed. There's no legal basis for additional screening, and detaining her will cause her to miss her court appearance, which could result in a default judgment against her. So unless you're prepared to explain to a federal judge why you obstructed justice, I suggest you let her through." The silence that followed was absolute. Murphy's face went from red to purple. "Who the hell do you think you are?" "Someone who knows the law," Celeste said evenly, "and someone who's recording every word of this interaction." She held up her phone, its camera pointed directly at them. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "You threatening us?" "I'm documenting a potential civil rights violation. There's a difference." The young mother seized the moment, grabbing her children's hands and slipping past the officers into the courthouse. Celeste watched her go, a small victory in a war that had been raging for centuries. "You just made a big mistake, lady," Murphy said, stepping close enough that Celeste could smell the coffee on his breath. "A real big mistake." "I don't make mistakes, officer. I collect evidence." "Oh, we got ourselves a lawyer," Daniel sneered. What are you, some ambulance chaser trying to drum up business? Or maybe you one of those activists coming down here to cause trouble? I'm a law lecturer, Celeste said, which was technically true. She did occasionally guest lecture at Emory Law School. And a citizen who believes in the Constitution. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have business inside. She tried to move forward, but Murphy blocked her path, his hand resting on his baton. Not so fast, Professor. You just jumped the line and interfered with official police business. That means you get the full treatment. Empty your pockets, Daniels ordered. And your purse, right here on the table. Everything. Celeste had known this was coming. She'd prepared for it. But preparation and experience didn't make the humiliation any easier to swallow. She set her small purse on the table and began removing items: wallet, phone, a pack of tissues, a protein bar, chapstick. Each item was examined with theatrical suspicion, held up to the light, turned over multiple times. What's this? Murphy grabbed her phone. You got a password on this. That's my personal property. It's evidence in an ongoing investigation. Unlock it. Under what authority? Under the authority of my goddamn badge. Now unlock it, or I'll charge you with obstruction. The live streamer's camera was still rolling. Celeste could see him in her peripheral vision, his phone capturing everything. Good, she thought. Let the world see. She unlocked the phone with her thumbprint, and Murphy began scrolling through it with invasive glee, making comments about her photos, her emails, her text messages. Each swipe of his finger was a violation, a reminder that privacy was a luxury afforded only to those who didn't look like her. Well, 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 Murphy said, his voice dripping with false surprise. Looks like our professor here has been texting quite a bit about today's hearing. Almost like she planned to be here causing trouble. I'm attending a public hearing, Celeste said. That's not a crime. Conspiracy to disrupt court proceedings is. That's not a real charge. It is now. Daniels grabbed her purse and dumped it upside down on the table. Contents spilled across the metal surface. More tissues, a tampon, her wallet, a small notebook, 2 pens, and a flash of silver caught the light. Celeste's federal ID badge, the one she'd carefully hidden in an inner pocket, tumbled out and landed face up on the table. For a fraction of a second, no one moved. Then Daniel's hand shot out, covering the badge before Celeste could grab it. He picked it up, his eyes scanning the text, and his face went from smug to confused to pale in the span of 3 heartbeats. Murphy, he said quietly, we got a problem. But before Murphy could respond, a new voice cut through the morning air, booming and full of theatrical authority. What seems to be the holdup out here? I got a courtroom full of people waiting, and y'all are out here playing TSA. Chief Royce Tanner emerged from the courthouse doors like a villain stepping onto a stage. At 6'4" and 250 pounds, he commanded space through sheer physical presence. His uniform was pristine, his badge polished to a mirror shine, his gray hair cut military short. At 58, Royce Tanner was an institution in Atlanta law enforcement, 3 decades on the force, 15 years as chief of courthouse security, and a reputation for ruthlessness that made even hardened criminals nervous. He was also, Celeste knew from her files, one of the most corrupt officers in the Southeast. Chief, Daniels stammered, trying to position his body to block the ID badge from view. We just got a troublemaker here who... Let me see, Tanner said, pushing past him. He grabbed the badge from Daniels' hand, his eyes scanning it with the kind of casual authority that came from a lifetime of holding power over others. Celeste watched his face, waiting for the moment of recognition. It never came. Tanner looked at the badge, looked at Celeste, and then impossibly he laughed. Federal Justice Department. He held up the badge like it was a toy from a cereal box. Deputy Director of Civil Rights Division. Another laugh, this one louder, meaner. Oh, this is rich. This is rich. He turned to face the growing crowd of citizens and officers holding the badge high. Y'all see, this little Miss activist here is trying to impersonate a federal officer. bought herself a fake badge off the internet, probably paid $20 for it, and thought she could waltz into my courthouse and start making demands. The crowd murmured, uncertain. That badge is real. Celeste said, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline flooding her system. And if you detain me, you'll be... I'll be what? Tanner's voice cracked like a whip. You gonna threaten me? You gonna tell me what I will and won't do in my own house? He stepped closer, using his height to loom over her. Let me tell you something, sweetheart. I've been doing this job since before you were born. I've seen every scam, every con, every fake ID and phony story that people like you try to pull. And you know what? They all end the same way, with handcuffs and a ride to lockup. Chief Tanner, Celeste said, her professor voice emerging despite her anger. I strongly suggest you verify my credentials before you... Verify. He was shouting now, playing to the crowd. The only thing I need to verify is whether you can afford bail, because you're about to need it. He tossed the badge back on the table like trash. Murphy Daniels, arrest this woman for impersonating a federal officer, obstruction of justice, and whatever the hell else we can think of. I want her processed, fingerprinted, and in a cell before lunch. The crowd gasped. The live streamer's camera zoomed in. Celeste felt Murphy's hand close around her arm, his grip deliberately painful. You have the right to remain silent. Murphy began, his voice thick with satisfaction. I know my rights, Celeste said quietly. Do you know yours? Because in about 30 seconds, you're going to wish you'd made a different choice. Is that a threat? It's a prediction. Tanner stepped forward again, his face inches from hers, now his breath hot on her skin. You think you're special? You think that fake badge makes you somebody? His voice dropped to a venomous whisper that only she could hear. You're nothing. You're less than nothing. And by the time I'm done with you, everyone's gonna know it. He straightened up, addressing the crowd again. This is what happens when people forget their place, when they get ideas above their station, when they think they can walk into a court of law and disrespect the men and women who keep you safe. He pointed at Celeste like she was evidence in a trial. Let this be a lesson to all of you. There are rules, there are procedures, and there are consequences for breaking them. The crowd was silent, a mix of fear and uncertainty written across their faces. Some of them recognized the injustice unfolding before them. Others had learned long ago that survival meant keeping your head down and your mouth shut. Only the live streamer kept filming, his phone held steady, his viewer count climbing past 20,000. Take her inside, Tanner ordered. I want her in courtroom 3. I'm gonna make an example out of her in front of God and everybody. Murphy and Daniels grabbed Celeste by both arms, their grips bruising in their enthusiasm. They marched her through the courthouse doors, past the metal detectors, down the marble hallway, where portraits of judges stared down with blank expressions. Behind them, the crowd began to disperse, most people wanting no part of what they'd just witnessed. But the elderly woman with the walker, the one who'd been shoved aside at the beginning of this nightmare, stood at the base of the courthouse steps, tears streaming down her face. I know her, she whispered to no one in particular. I know that woman. That's Dr. Morgan. She helped my grandson when the police beat him in Birmingham. She testified for us. She saved his life. But her voice was too quiet, lost in the morning air. Inside, Celeste was pushed into an elevator, Tanner's bulk filling the small space with menace. You picked the wrong day to play hero, he said as the doors closed. And you definitely picked the wrong courthouse. Celeste said nothing, her mind already racing ahead, calculating angles, preparing for what came next. The elevator climbed toward courtroom 3, toward a confrontation that would crack the foundations of justice itself. And somewhere in the ether, 20,000 people watched a live stream, their comments section exploding with outrage, their shares multiplying by the second. The truth, Celeste thought, has a way of spreading faster than lies. She just had to survive long enough to let it. The elevator doors opened onto the 3rd floor, and Celeste Morgan walked toward her trial. Not the one she'd come to attend, but the one that would judge whether justice in America was still possible, or whether it had finally died in the marble halls it claimed to protect. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime that felt obscene in its normalcy, like a doorbell ringing at a funeral. Courtroom 3 sprawled before them, a cathedral of supposed justice, with oak-paneled walls, brass fixtures, and rows of gallery benches already filled with spectators. The morning docket always drew a crowd in Atlanta defendants waiting for their hearings, family members clutching tissues, and hope lawyers in cheap suits, shuffling papers, and the usual collection of courthouse regulars who treated the proceedings like theater. Today, they were about to get a show they'd never forget. Murphy and Daniels shoved Celeste through the double doors with enough force to make her stumble. Heads turned. Heads. Conversations died mid-sentence. The courtroom's ambient noise, that peculiar blend of whispered anxieties and shuffling feet, collapsed into silence as Chief Royce Tanner strode in behind her, his boots echoing like gunshots on the tile floor. "All rise," a bailiff called out automatically, though Judge Harrison's bench sat empty. The morning session hadn't officially started yet, but Tanner's presence commanded the same deference a judge would receive. Maybe more. The spectators stood a wave of bodies rising in reluctant obedience. Sit down," Tanner said, waving his hand like a king granting permission to his subjects. "We got ourselves a special presentation this morning before the regular docket begins." He grabbed Celeste by the shoulder and spun her to face the gallery. His fingers dug into her collarbone hard enough to bruise. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice booming through the courtroom's acoustics, "I want you all to witness what happens when someone tries to make a mockery of this institution. When they think they can walk in here with fake credentials and disrespect the officers who keep you safe." A woman in the third row, a defense attorney named Patricia Chen, whom Celeste recognized from a civil rights conference 2 years ago, half rose from her seat, her face pale with recognition. "Chief Tanner, I don't think—" "Nobody asked you what you think, counselor. Sit down." Patricia sat, but her phone was already in her hand, fingers flying across the screen. Celeste scanned the room, cataloging faces, searching for allies. She found mostly fear. People who'd learned that survival in this system meant keeping your head down and your mouth shut. But in the back row, she spotted him, the young live streamer from the courthouse steps, his phone still recording, now partially concealed behind a newspaper he wasn't reading. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. He nodded almost imperceptibly. Good, Celeste thought. Keep filming. Now then. Tanner continued pacing in front of the judge's bench like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. "This woman right here, what's your name, sweetheart?" "Dr. Celeste Morgan." The title made him laugh, a sound like rocks in a blender. "Dr. O, we got ourselves a doctor." He turned to the crowd, eyebrows raised in mock amazement. "Everybody be real careful, we got a doctor in the house. What kind of doctor are you, honey? The kind that writes fake prescriptions, or the kind that couldn't cut it in medical school?" "I have a doctorate in criminal justice from Harvard Law," Celeste said evenly, "and a master's degree in forensic psychology from Georgetown." The information hung in the air like a challenge. Tanner's smile faltered for just a moment, a hairline crack in his performance before he recovered. "Harvard, Georgetown." He whistled low. "Damn, girl, you really went all out with your backstory. I bet you got a whole resume printed up and everything. Probably got business cards too, huh? Maybe a fancy LinkedIn profile." A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. People weren't sure if they were supposed to find this funny or horrifying. "Chief Tanner," Celeste said, her voice cutting through the laughter like a scalpel. "I'm going to say this one more time clearly and on the record. I am Deputy Director of the Federal Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. My credentials are legitimate and verifiable. If you detain me unlawfully, you will face federal charges for civil rights violations, kidnapping, and obstruction of justice." The courtroom went silent again. Tanner's face shifted, the theatrical amusement draining away to reveal something uglier underneath. Something that had always been there, just waiting for an excuse to show itself. "You threatening me?" His voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. "You standing in my courtroom in front of my officers threatening me?" I'm informing you of the legal consequences of your actions. That's not a threat, it's a fact. A fact? He moved closer, invading her space, using his size to intimidate. You want to talk facts. Here's a fact you're under arrest. Here's another fact you're going to learn some respect if I have to beat it into you. Murmurs erupted in the gallery. A woman gasped. Someone's phone clattered to the floor. Patricia Chen stood again, her voice shaking but determined. Chief Tanner, I'm formally objecting to these proceedings. This woman has the right to counsel, the right to remain silent, and the right to a fair hearing before an actual judge. What you're doing here is what? Tanner whirled on her. You interfering with official police business. Counselor, you want to join your friend here in lockup? Patricia's jaw clenched, but she held her ground. I'm exercising my duty as an officer of the court to prevent a clear violation of constitutional rights. Your duty? Tanner laughed again, but this time there was no humor in it. Your duty is to sit down and shut up before I have you disbarred for contempt. You can't disbar anyone. You're not a judge. But I know all the judges in this building and they listen when I talk. So ask yourself, is defending this criminal really worth your career? Patricia stood frozen. Her phone still in her hand, her face torn between principle and survival. In the back row, the live streamer whispered into his phone. Y'all seeing this viewer count? Just hit 42,000. Keep sharing. The whole world needs to see what's happening in courtroom 3. Tanner turned back to Celeste, his patience, what little he'd had, completely exhausted. Murphy, bring me her bag. The one with the fake badge. Murphy scrambled forward, holding Celeste's purse and the silver ID badge like exhibits in a trial. Tanner snatched the badge and held it up to the light, examining it with exaggerated scrutiny. Federal Justice Department. He read aloud, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Deputy Director, Civil Rights Division, Dr. Celeste Morgan. He lowered the badge and looked at her with theatrical pity. You know what the sad part is? This is actually pretty good quality. You probably paid $200-300 for this. Got it made on one of those websites that makes fake IDs for college kids who want to buy beer. That badge was issued by the Department of Justice, Celeste said. It has security features that can't be replicated. Call the Federal Verification Hotline. The number is on the back. Tanner flipped the badge over, squinted at it, then tossed it onto the defense table with a clatter. Oh, I'm supposed to call a hotline. A number you probably set up with one of your friends to answer and confirm your little story. He shook his head. Lady, I wasn't born yesterday. Then call the DOJ switchboard. Ask for Director William Chen. He'll confirm my identity in 30 seconds. Or, Tanner said, stepping even closer, I could save everyone a lot of time and just teach you what happens when people lie to law enforcement. The threat hung in the air, palpable and ugly. A middle-aged black man in the second row, wearing the rumpled suit of a public defender, stood up slowly, his voice careful and measured. Chief, I've been practicing law in this courthouse for 16 years. I've never seen you conduct an interrogation in open court before a judge arrives. This isn't procedure. This isn't even close to legal. Tanner's head swiveled toward him, like a predator spotting new prey. And you are James Crawford, Public Defender's Office. And I'm telling you, sir, that what you're doing right now is going to get thrown out of any court in this country. You're violating her Fourth Amendment rights, her Fifth Amendment rights, her Sixth Amendment rights. Her imaginary rights, you mean? Tanner's voice rose. The rights she thinks she has because she bought a fake badge and read some law books, those rights. Her constitutional rights as a United States citizen, Crawford insisted, though sweat had begun to bead on his forehead. Rights that don't disappear just because you don't believe her credentials. Sit down, Crawford. Chief, I said sit down. The roar filled the courtroom like thunder. Crawford sat, but his phone was out now too, joining Patricia Chen's, joining the live streamers, joining half a dozen others scattered through the gallery. Celeste watched it all with the detached clarity of someone who'd studied crowd dynamics for 2 decades. She could see the fear spreading through the room like a contagion, but she could also see something else, the first stirrings of defiance. People were recording. People were watching. The panopticon was reversing, the watchers becoming the watched. "You think those phones scare me?" Tanner said, addressing the room. "Go ahead. Record. Share it on your social medias. Tweet it. Facebook it, TikTok it, whatever the hell you people do. Because all you're going to show the world is what happens when someone tries to impersonate a federal officer and disrespect law enforcement." He turned back to Celeste, and something in his eyes had shifted. The performance was over. Now came the violence that had always been waiting underneath. "Last chance," he said quietly, just for her. "Admit you're lying. Apologize to these good officers, and maybe I'll go easy on you." Celeste met his eyes, her voice steady as bedrock. "I will not apologize for telling the truth. I will not recant facts because they're inconvenient for you, and I will not bow to a bully in a uniform just because he's used to people being afraid of him." The slap came so fast that several people in the gallery didn't process it until they saw blood. Tanner's hand, massive, calloused, wearing 2 rings that caught the fluorescent light, connected with Celeste's face with a sound like a gunshot. The impact whipped her head to the side, sent her staggering backward, opened a cut on her cheekbone that immediately began streaming crimson down her jaw. The courtroom erupted. A woman screamed. Someone shouted, "Oh my God!" The live streamer's phone caught everything, the moment of impact. The spray of blood droplets, the shock and horror spreading across Celeste's face before she could control it. Celeste's hand went to her cheek, came away red. She stared at her own blood for a moment, as if trying to reconcile the physical reality with the supposed sanctity of the courthouse around her. "Did you just—" she began, her voice thick with shock. "Shut up," Tanner snarled. "Shut your lying mouth before I shut it for you." Patricia Chen was on her feet again, screaming now. "This is assault. You just committed assault in open court. Everyone here is a witness." "Witness to what?" Tanner whirled on her. "Witness to me using necessary force to subdue a violent suspect who was resisting arrest." She wasn't resisting, she was standing still. "She lunged at me. You all saw it, didn't you?" He looked around the courtroom, his eyes promising consequences to anyone who disagreed. Most people looked away. But James Crawford didn't. "No, sir, she didn't move. You struck her without provocation. That's assault and battery." "You calling me a liar, Crawford?" "I'm calling what I saw, and so are those cameras." Tanner's face went purple. He grabbed Celeste by her hair, her carefully pinned bun coming undone in his fist, and yanked her head back, forcing her to look at the ceiling. "You want to see what happens to liars?" he hissed. "You want to see what I do to people who think they can come into my house and disrespect me?" Celeste's scalp screamed in pain, but she refused to cry out. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. "Officer Murphy," Tanner barked. "Daniels, restrain this suspect. She's becoming violent." It was a lie so transparent that several people in the gallery actually gasped at the audacity of it. Celeste hadn't moved, hadn't raised a hand, hadn't done anything except bleed. But Murphy and Daniels grabbed her arms anyway, wrenching them behind her back with enough force to make her shoulders burn. Handcuffs clicked into place, biting into her wrists. "Wait!" A new voice called out, a young woman near the front, maybe 25, wearing a press credential around her neck. "Wait, I know her. I've seen her before." Tanner's head snapped toward her. "You know this criminal." "I've seen her on the news. I'm a reporter with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and I swear I've seen this woman's face in our archives. She testified before Congress about police reform. She, what?" Tanner released Celeste's hair and moved toward the reporter with predatory speed. "She conned her way onto C-SPAN with her fake credentials. Is that what you're telling me?" "No, I'm saying maybe you should verify her identity before you." "Before I, what?" "Do my job." Protect this court from criminals and con artists. The reporter her nameplate read. Sarah Williams held up her phone, scrolling frantically through search results. Her name is Dr. Celeste Morgan. She's the Deputy Director of the Federal Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. She's testified before Congress 17 times. She's led investigations into police departments in Birmingham, Ferguson, Baltimore. That's enough. Tanner lunged forward and slapped the phone out of Sarah's hand. It clattered across the floor screen, cracking against the tile. You just destroyed my property. Sue me, Tanner sneered. Oh, wait, you can't because I got qualified immunity. Ain't that something? Sarah's face went white, but she didn't back down. I'm a member of the press. You can't. I can do whatever I want in this courtroom. Or haven't you figured that out yet? Behind them, Celeste swayed on her feet, still handcuffed, blood now dripping from her chin onto the floor. Each drop hit the marble with a soft pat like rain on stone, marking time in red. A small voice cut through the chaos, high and clear and devastating in its innocence. Mama, why are they hurting that lady? Every head turned toward the source. A little boy, maybe 6 years old, sitting in the gallery next to his mother. His eyes were wide and wet with tears, his small hand gripping his mother's sleeve. Hush, baby, his mother whispered urgently, trying to pull him close. Don't look. Just don't look. But she's bleeding. Why is the policeman making her bleed? The question hung in the air like an indictment. Tanner's jaw clenched. Someone get that child out of here. We have every right to be here, the mother said, her voice shaking. My husband's case is on the docket this morning. Then teach your son to be quiet before I have you removed for disrupting court proceedings. He's 6 years old. He's asking a question that every adult in this room is thinking. The live streamer's viewer count hit 75,000. Tanner turned back to Celeste, and something in his face had changed again. The performance, the justifications, the pretense of following procedure, all of it was gone now. What remained was pure rage, the kind that had probably been simmering inside him for decades, waiting for an excuse to explode. You did this, he said to Celeste, his voice low and venomous. You came in here with your fake badge and your fancy degrees and your attitude, and you made me do this. You made me look bad in front of all these people. You made me... I didn't make you do anything, Celeste said, her voice surprisingly steady, despite the blood and pain. You chose violence. You chose brutality. You chose to be exactly what you've always been. The second blow came from his fist, this time catching her in the ribs with enough force to lift her off her feet. She crumpled forward, only Murphy and Daniel's grip on her arms, keeping her from hitting the floor. The courtroom exploded into chaos. People were shouting now, some demanding they stop, others calling for someone to call 911. Still, others just screaming in horror and disbelief. Sarah Williams had retrieved her cracked phone and was recording everything, her hands shaking, but her camera steady. Stop it! James Crawford rushed forward, trying to get between Tanner and Celeste. For God's sake, stop! You're going to kill her! Tanner shoved Crawford backward, sending the public defender stumbling into the gallery benches. Anyone else want to interfere with official police business? Tanner roared. Anyone else want to obstruct justice? No one moved. Murphy and Daniels dragged Celeste toward the side wall, her feet barely keeping up, her body still reeling from the punch to her ribs. They slammed her against the wood paneling hard enough that several people flinched at the sound of impact. Celeste's vision blurred. Pain radiated through her chest, her face, her shoulders. But somewhere in the fog of agony, her mind was still working, still calculating, still preparing. Not yet, she thought. Not yet. Search her again, Tanner ordered. Every pocket, every seam. I want to know who she's working with, who put her up to this. Murphy's hands were rough and invasive, pawing through her blazer pockets, her pants pockets, checking her waistband with deliberate impropriety. Chief, he said after a moment. There's something in her inside pocket. Feels like, I don't know, some kind of card or something. Pull it out. Murphy reached into Celeste's blazer, the inner pocket where she'd secured a second form of identification. knowing the first might get confiscated or destroyed. He pulled out a business card, laminated and official, with the seal of the Federal Justice Department embossed in silver. Dr. Celeste Morgan, it read, Deputy Director, Civil Rights Division. Below that, a phone number, a direct line. Murphy stared at it, his face going pale. "Chief," he said quietly. "Chief, this looks real." Tanner snatched it from his hand, examined it with the same theatrical suspicion he'd shown everything else. But this time, something in his eyes flickered. Doubt. Just a shadow of it, but there. "It's another fake," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Call the number," Celeste said through swelling lips. "Call it right now in front of everyone. Put it on speaker. See who answers." Tanner's hand closed around the card, crumpling it slightly. "I don't take orders from criminals." "Then you're making the biggest mistake of your life." "The only mistake I'm making is wasting time on you." He threw the crumpled card onto the floor and turned to his officers. "Take her to holding. I'll deal with her after the morning docket is finished. Maybe a few hours in a cell will teach her some manners." Murphy and Daniel started to drag Celeste toward the courtroom exit, her feet leaving smeared trails of blood on the marble floor. As they passed the gallery, the little boy who'd asked the question started crying openly, his sobs echoing through the room. "It's not right," he wept. "It's not right, Mama. Why won't anyone help her?" His mother clutched him close, tears streaming down her own face, unable to answer, because there was no answer that would make sense to a 6-year-old child who still believed the world was fair. Sarah Williams lifted her camera higher, making sure she got every frame, every moment, every drop of blood. The live streamer in the back row whispered urgently, 120,000 viewers. This is going viral. Everyone needs to see this. Share it everywhere." And as Celeste was hauled through the double doors, her vision swimming her body, screaming in pain, she caught one final glimpse of the courtroom behind her. Patricia Chen was on her phone speaking urgently to someone, her face set with determination. James Crawford was gathering witnesses, taking names, his legal pad already filling with notes. And on the floor, partially hidden under a bench, the crumpled business card caught the light, its silver federal seal visible even in the shadows. The truth, Celeste thought as consciousness began to slip, has a way of surviving. Even when they try to kill it. Even when they try to bury it in blood and lies and the corrupted halls of power. The truth survives. And it was about to burn this courthouse to the ground. The holding cell smelled like despair, an industrial cleaner, a combination that had probably soaked into the concrete walls over decades of human suffering. Celeste sat on the metal bench, her back against the cold cinder block, trying to breathe through ribs that felt like shattered glass grinding together with each inhale. Blood had dried in a rust-colored streak down her jaw and neck, staining the collar of her white blouse. Her left eye was swelling shut, turning the world into a narrowing tunnel of vision, but her mind was sharp. Sharp enough to hear the commotion building beyond the cell door. Voices raised in argument, footsteps running. The distinctive crackle of police radios turned up, two loud officers trying to talk over each other in escalating panic. Something was happening. Through the small window in the cell door, Celeste could see Murphy pacing back and forth in the hallway, his phone pressed to his ear, his face the color of old dishwater. "I don't know, sir," he was saying, his voice climbing toward hysteria. "Chief Tanner said she was fake, said it was all fake. And now people are calling the mayor's office, is calling somebody from the governor's office just—" His voice cut off as someone on the other end interrupted. "Yes, sir. She's in holding cell 3. No, sir. She's been—" There was an incident. Chief Tanner had to use force to subdue her because she was— Another interruption, longer this time. Murphy's face went from pale to gray. "Resisting arrest, sir. She was resisting arrest and impersonating a federal what?" "No, I didn't personally verify her," Chief Tanner said. The phone was apparently snatched from his hand because Murphy suddenly went silent, staring at someone Celeste couldn't see. Then she heard a new voice, sharp and authoritative, echoing down the hallway. "Get Chief Tanner down here now, and somebody call a goddamn ambulance. If she's injured, we're going to have the entire federal government crawling up our asses by sunset." That was Captain Frank Morrison, head of the Atlanta Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. Celeste recognized his voice from depositions she'd reviewed in preparation for today's hearing. Morrison was corrupt too. They almost all were, but he was smart enough to recognize when the ship was sinking. And right now, judging by the panic in his voice, the ship wasn't just sinking. It was already underwater. The cell door burst open. Morrison stood there, a compact man in his 50s with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too much to be shocked by anything. But he looked shocked now, staring at Celeste's battered face with an expression somewhere between horror and calculation. "Dr. Morgan," he said, and the title came out like a confession. Jesus Christ, they really did it." "They did?" Celeste said, her voice rough but steady. "All of it on camera. Multiple cameras. Probably 100,000 people watching by now." Morrison's jaw worked like he was chewing on words too bitter to swallow. "I need to get you medical attention. And I need to call there are people trying to reach you. Your office. The director. Someone from the White House just called the station." The White House. Celeste almost smiled, but it hurt too much. "That would be Special Advisor Chen. She's my former partner. We worked the Ferguson case together." "Former partner," Morrison repeated weakly. "Right. Of course you did." Behind him, Murphy appeared in the doorway, looking like a man watching his entire career dissolve in real time. "Captain, I swear I didn't know. Chief Tanner said she was fake, said the badge was purchased online, and I just followed orders." "You just followed orders." Morrison repeated, his voice flat. "You hear yourself, Murphy. You sound like a Nazi at Nuremberg." "But Chief Tanner said—" "I don't give a damn what Tanner said. You put your hands on a federal officer. You participated in her assault. You stood by while your chief beat a woman in open court." Morrison's voice rose with each sentence. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Any idea at all?" Murphy's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Down the hallway, more voices were rising in volume and urgency. Celeste could hear Daniels trying to explain himself to someone, his voice cracking with fear. She could hear phones ringing constantly, a chorus of electronic chirping that spoke to a crisis spiraling out of control. And underneath it all, she could hear something else. Something that made her heart rate quicken, despite the pain. Chanting. Faint at first, but growing louder. Coming from outside the building. "Let her go. Let her go. Let her go." Morrison heard it too. His face went even paler. "How many people are out there?" he asked someone Celeste couldn't see. "At least 500, sir." A young officer's voice replied. "And more arriving every minute. The live stream got picked up by CNN. They're running it on a loop. Every network is covering it. It's everywhere." "Everywhere," Morrison repeated hollowly. "Of course it is." He turned back to Celeste, and for a moment, something almost like respect flickered in his eyes. "You planned this," he said quietly. "You knew exactly what would happen when you walked through those courthouse doors this morning." "I hoped it wouldn't come to this," Celeste replied. "I hoped your officers would verify my credentials and let me through. I hoped Chief Tanner would make the phone call instead of making assumptions. But I prepared for the worst because I've been doing this work long enough to know that hope isn't strategy. So you let them beat you. You let them arrest you, assault you, put you on display all while cameras were rolling. I didn't let them do anything. They chose their actions. I just made sure those actions were witnessed." Morrison shook his head slowly, a man recognizing he was outmatched. "You're going to destroy this department." "No," Celeste said, pushing herself to her feet, despite the screaming protest of her ribs. "Your department destroyed itself. I'm just making sure everyone can see the ruins." She walked past Morrison into the hallway, each step an exercise in controlled agony. Murphy pressed himself against the wall as she passed, unable to meet her eyes. "Dr. Morgan," Morrison called after her. "Where are you going?" "Back to courtroom 3. I have a hearing to attend." "You need medical attention. You're injured. I should ensure that Chief Royce Tanner faces the consequences of his actions in the same public forum where he committed them. That's what I should do." She kept walking, following the corridor back toward the elevators, toward the courtroom, toward the reckoning that had been building for 30 years. Behind her, Morrison's radio crackled to life. "Captain, we have a situation at the main entrance. The crowd is trying to push through. They're demanding to see Dr. Morgan. They want proof she's alive." Morrison cursed under his breath and jogged to catch up with Celeste. "Listen to me," he said urgently. "I know you want justice. I know you want accountability. But if you go back up there right now in your condition with emotions running this high, someone could get hurt. Someone could get killed." "Someone already got hurt, Captain. Me. In a federal courthouse. By officers sworn to protect and serve. So forgive me if I'm not particularly concerned about the comfort level of the people who caused this crisis." The elevator doors opened. Celeste stepped inside. Morrison hesitated, then followed. As the elevator climbed, he pulled out his phone and made a call. "It's Morrison. Is Judge Harrison in the building?" "Well, find him. Tell him to get to courtroom 3 immediately. We've got a federal officer who was assaulted by courthouse security, and she's about to walk back into the room where it happened. Yes, I'm serious. Yes, that federal officer. The one on every news channel in America right now." He hung up and looked at Celeste. "You're really going to do this?" "I really am. Tanner's going to be up there. He still thinks he's in the right. He still thinks you're fake. Then this should be educational for him." The elevator chimed. 3rd floor. The doors opened onto chaos. The hallway outside courtroom 3 was packed with people. Reporters, camera crews, court staff, lawyers, citizens who'd been in the building and rushed up when word spread. Every phone was out. Every camera was pointed at the elevator. Every eye was locked on Celeste as she emerged. For a moment, no one spoke. They just stared at her battered face, her blood-stained clothes, the way she held herself like every breath was a battle. Then, someone started clapping. A single pair of hands, slow and deliberate, echoing through the hallway. Others joined in. Within seconds, the applause was thunderous, mixed with shouts of support. "We're with you. Don't let them win. Justice for Dr. Morgan." Sarah Williams pushed through the crowd, her cracked phone still recording. "Dr. Morgan, Sarah Williams, Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Can you confirm that you were assaulted by Chief Royce Tanner in courtroom 3 approximately 45 minutes ago?" Celeste looked directly into the camera. "I can confirm that Chief Royce Tanner struck me twice in the face, punched me in the ribs, and ordered his officers to restrain and detain me despite my repeated attempts to verify my federal credentials. I can confirm that all of this occurred in open court in front of dozens of witnesses and was recorded by multiple cameras. And I can confirm that I am now returning to that courtroom to ensure that justice is served." The crowd erupted in cheers. Morrison tried to position himself between Celeste and the courtroom doors. "Please," he said quietly. "Let me go in first. Let me try to de-escalate. If you walk in there looking like this, Tanner might what, hit me again? That's what I'm counting on." She pushed past him and grabbed the courtroom door handle. Inside, she could hear Tanner's voice still booming, still confident, still performing for an audience that no longer existed. "And let this be a lesson to all of you. The law applies to everyone equally. No one gets special treatment just because they claim to be somebody important. No one gets to walk into this courthouse and—" Celeste shoved the doors open. The courtroom fell silent so abruptly it was like someone had hit a mute button on reality. Every head turned. Every eye widened. Every mouth dropped open. Chief Royce Tanner stood at the front of the room mid-gesture. His finger pointed at the gallery like an Old Testament prophet delivering judgment. His face was flushed with self-righteous anger. his posture radiating the absolute certainty of a man who'd never faced consequences in his life. That certainty evaporated the moment he saw Celeste. She walked down the center aisle, her footsteps echoing in the absolute silence, blood still visible on her face and clothes, one eye swollen nearly shut, but her back straight, and her gaze locked on Tanner with the intensity of a laser cutting through steel. The gallery was packed, now word had spread, and every seat was filled with people who needed to see what happened next. Patricia Chen sat in the front row, her phone recording. James Crawford stood against the side wall, his legal pad covered in notes, his face set with grim determination. The little boy who'd cried sat with his mother, his small hand gripping hers, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. And in the back corner, Celeste spotted him, the live streamer. His camera, steady, his viewer count visible on the screen. 287,000 people watching live. "You," Tanner said, his voice strangled. "You're supposed to be in holding. You're under arrest. I'm not under arrest." Celeste said, her voice carrying through the courtroom with perfect clarity despite her injuries. "I was kidnapped. I was assaulted. I was detained unlawfully. But I was never lawfully arrested because you can't arrest someone for telling the truth." Tanner's face went purple. "Murphy Daniels. Get her out of here now." But Murphy and Daniels stood frozen at their posts, their eyes darting between Tanner and Celeste, between their orders and their futures, clearly calculating which would destroy them faster, obeying or refusing. "They're not going to touch me again," Celeste said. "Because they've finally figured out what you haven't. They've figured out that I am exactly who I said I was." "You're a liar and a con artist," Tanner spat. "And when I'm done with you, when you're done with me, you'll be in a federal prison cell." Celeste took another step forward. "But first, let me properly introduce myself since you didn't bother to verify my credentials." She reached into her jacket, the same inside pocket Murphy had searched, but somehow missed in his panic, and pulled out a leather wallet. She opened it, revealing another federal ID badge, this one protected by a clear plastic sleeve, impossible to dismiss or destroy. "My name is Dr. Celeste Morgan. I hold a doctorate in criminal justice from Harvard Law School and a master's degree in forensic psychology from Georgetown. I have been with the Federal Justice Department for 23 years. For the last 7 years, I have served as Deputy Director of the Civil Rights Division." She held the badge up high, making sure every camera in the room could capture it. "I have led federal investigations into police misconduct in 17 cities. I have testified before Congress on 23 separate occasions. I have secured convictions against 47 law enforcement officers for civil rights violations. And this morning, I came to this courthouse to attend a hearing on the systematic abuse of power by courthouse security officers, a hearing that you, Chief Tanner, were scheduled to testify at." The silence in the courtroom was so complete that people could hear their own heartbeats. Tanner's mouth worked soundlessly. His eyes darted to Murphy, to Daniels, to Captain Morrison, who'd entered behind Celeste, seeking some confirmation that this couldn't be real, that this had to be a mistake. But Morrison just nodded slowly, his face grim. "It's true," Morrison said. "I've confirmed it with the Justice Department. She's exactly who she says she is." A woman in the third row gasped. Someone else swore under their breath. The live streamer zoomed in on Tanner's face, capturing the moment when 30 years of unchecked power began to crumble. "That's impossible," Tanner whispered. You can't be." "But I am." Celeste took another step forward, close enough now that Tanner could see his own reflection in her swollen eye. "And every action you took against me this morning, every insult, every assault, every unlawful detention was witnessed, recorded, and broadcast to hundreds of thousands of people. You didn't just attack a woman. You attacked a federal officer in the performance of her duties. You obstructed a federal investigation. You violated my civil rights in the most public, undeniable way possible." Tanner staggered backward, his hand reaching for the judge's bench to steady himself. "I didn't know," he said, his voice cracking. "You should have told me. You should have." "I told you repeatedly. I showed you my badge. I gave you verification numbers. I provided my business card. I did everything legally required and then some. You chose not to believe me because you couldn't imagine that a black woman could hold the position I hold. I'm not racist. I treat everyone the same. You treat everyone the same. Celeste's laugh was sharp and bitter. You've presided over this courthouse for 15 years. In that time, black defendants have been 67% more likely to be detained before trial, 43% more likely to face enhanced charges, and 92% more likely to report mistreatment by security staff. I have the data. I have the documentation. I have 17 sworn affidavits from people you brutalized, humiliated, and violated, all in the name of justice. A man in the back row stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and careful. He was in his 40s, wearing a postal worker's uniform. His face weathered, but his eyes sharp with recognition. I know you, he said, his voice shaking with emotion. Dr. Morgan, I served under your command in Birmingham. You were the one who, when those officers beat my nephew half to death and tried to cover it up, you're the one who came down there. You investigated. You got them convicted. Celeste turned to look at him, and for the first time since entering the courtroom, her expression softened. Marcus Johnson, she said. Your nephew was Deshaun. He was 17. They pulled him over for a broken taillight and put him in the hospital for 3 weeks. Yes, ma'am. Tears were streaming down Marcus's face now. They said he resisted. They said he attacked them. They were going to charge him with assault on a police officer. But you proved they were lying. You saved his life. Deshaun saved his own life by surviving, Celeste said gently. I just made sure the people who hurt him faced consequences. And now you're here, Marcus said, his voice growing stronger. Now you're here, and this man. He pointed at Tanner. He did to you what those officers did to Deshaun. Beat you for telling the truth. Tried to make you the criminal when he's the one breaking the law. Other people in the gallery started nodding, murmuring agreement. A woman stood up. You investigated the case in Ferguson. My cousin sent me articles about you. You were the one who exposed the whole department. Another person rose. Baltimore. You were part of the team that brought down the gun trace task force. One by one, people stood, their voices joining together, creating a chorus of recognition and validation that Tanner couldn't shout down or silence. Tanner looked around wildly, watching his authority evaporate like morning fog. You're all someone called Judge Harrison. This is still my courtroom. I still have authority here. You have nothing, Celeste said quietly. You had power, but you used it to hurt people. You had authority, but you wielded it like a weapon against the vulnerable. You had respect, but you earned it through fear instead of justice. And now, all of it is gone. She turned to address the gallery, her voice carrying to every corner of the room and beyond to the cameras that would broadcast this moment to millions. Let this be a lesson to everyone watching. Power without accountability is tyranny. Authority without oversight is oppression. And justice delayed is justice denied. For too long, we've allowed people like Chief Tanner to operate in the shadows, to abuse their positions, to brutalize citizens without consequences. But the shadows only exist when we look away. And today, the entire world is watching. The courtroom doors burst open again. Judge Harrison rushed in, his robes half on his face, flushed from running. What in God's name is happening in my courtroom? He demanded. Then he saw Celeste's face, and his expression went from anger to shock to horror in 3 seconds flat. Dr. Morgan, my God, what happened to you? Chief Tanner assaulted me. Your Honor, in this courtroom, approximately 50 minutes ago, multiple witnesses, multiple video recordings, all available for your review. Judge Harrison looked at Tanner, at the crowd, at the cameras, and Celeste could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Harrison was part of the system too. He'd presided over cases where Tanner's security team had brutalized defendants, and he'd never asked questions, never investigated, never cared. But caring and self-preservation weren't the same thing. Chief Tanner, Harrison said slowly, I'm going to need you to surrender your badge and weapon immediately. Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding. This woman came in here with fake credentials, and the credentials are real, Morrison interrupted. I've confirmed it. She's Deputy Director of the Federal Justice Department, and Chief Tanner assaulted her in front of dozens of witnesses. Harrison's face went white. In my courtroom. He assaulted a federal officer in my courtroom. Yes, Your Honor. While court was in session. Before official session began, but yes, in the courtroom. Harrison sat down heavily in his chair, looking like a man who'd just watched his career end in real time. Chief Tanner, he said quietly, you're under arrest. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Tanner's face went through a dozen emotions: disbelief, rage, fear, desperation, before settling on defiance. You can't arrest me. I'm the chief of courthouse security. I answer to the mayor, not to some. You answer to the law. Harrison cut him off. Just like everyone else, officers take Chief Tanner into custody. Murphy and Daniels looked at each other, then at Tanner, then at Celeste. Morrison stepped forward. I'll do it. He approached Tanner with handcuffs drawn, his face carefully neutral. Turn around, Chief. Hands behind your back. For a moment, it looked like Tanner might fight. His hands clenched into fists, his body tensed, his eyes darted toward the exit like he was calculating whether he could run. But there was nowhere to run. The courtroom was packed. The hallway was full of cameras. The building was surrounded by hundreds of people chanting for justice. The walls he'd built around his corruption were collapsing, and he was trapped in the rubble. Tanner turned around slowly and put his hands behind his back. The click of the handcuffs echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. Then another sound joined it, applause, starting with Marcus Johnson in the back row, spreading through the gallery like wildfire, growing louder and louder, until the entire courtroom was on its feet, clapping, cheering, crying, celebrating a moment of justice so rare it felt like witnessing a miracle. Celeste stood in the center of it all, battered and bloody, but unbroken, and allowed herself a small smile despite the pain. The live stream viewer count hit 1 million. And across America, in living rooms and offices and coffee shops and college dorms, people watched as the impossible happened. They watched as power finally faced consequences. They watched as truth finally defeated lies. They watched as one woman's courage ignited a fire that would burn through every corrupt institution that thought itself untouchable. The reckoning had begun. And it was far from over. Morrison led Tanner through the courtroom in handcuffs, and the former chief's swagger had dissolved into something uglier, a hunted animal's desperate confusion. His boots, which had echoed with authority just an hour ago, now shuffled against the marble, like a prisoner being led to execution. Every camera tracked his path. Every phone captured the moment, immortalizing the fall of a man who'd believed himself invincible. As they passed Celeste, Tanner stopped, forcing Morrison to halt. This isn't over. Tanner hissed, his voice low enough that only she could hear. You think you've won. You think one arrest changes anything. I've got friends. Powerful friends. Judges, politicians. People who owe me. I'll be out by tomorrow, and you'll be the one facing charges for what? Celeste interrupted, her voice steady. For being assaulted, for having my civil rights violated on camera. Please, Chief Tanner, tell me exactly what charges you think will stick against a federal officer who was brutalized while attempting to perform her duties. Tanner's jaw clenched so hard she could hear his teeth grinding. You don't know who you're dealing with. Yes, I do. I've been investigating you for 8 months. I know about the evidence you've tampered with. I know about the confessions you've coerced. I know about the settlement money the city paid to victims. You brutalized taxpayer money used to cover up your crimes. I know about Judge Brennan and the cases he threw out because you asked him to. I know about the DA's office and the charges they dropped when you made a phone call. I know everything, Chief Tanner. And by the end of the week, so will everyone else. The color drained from Tanner's face, replaced by a sickly gray that made him look 20 years older. Morrison tugged on his arm. Let's go, Chief. You're making this worse. As they disappeared through the courtroom doors, the crowd outside erupted in cheers so loud they rattled the windows. The chanting had evolved, grown more specific, more demanding. "Lock him up! Lock him up! Lock him up!" Judge Harrison remained seated at his bench, looking like he'd aged a decade in the past hour. He gavelled for order, though the courtroom was already settling into an electric silence, everyone waiting to see what happened next. "Dr. Morgan," Harrison said carefully, his voice stripped of its usual authority. That is the court. We need to address your injuries, and I need to formally apologize for what occurred in this courtroom today. There is no excuse for—" "You're right, Your Honor. There is no excuse." Celeste walked toward the bench, each step measured, each word deliberate. "But there is an explanation, and that explanation is systemic. What happened to me this morning wasn't an aberration. It wasn't one bad officer having a bad day. It was the inevitable result of a culture that values power over justice, that protects the corrupt, and that punishes anyone who dares to challenge it." Harrison's hand trembled slightly as he adjusted his glasses. "Dr. Morgan, I assure you that this court has presided over 1,700 cases in the past 3 years where courthouse security was accused of excessive force discrimination or rights violations. Do you know how many of those complaints resulted in disciplinary action, Your Honor?" Harrison didn't answer. 3, Celeste continued. 3 officers received written reprimands, not terminations, not prosecutions, written reprimands. That's a 0.17% accountability rate. Would you call that justice? The silence that followed was damning. Sarah Williams stood up, her broken phone still recording. "Your Honor. Sarah Williams, Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Do you have any comment on Dr. Morgan's statistics? Are you aware that your courtroom has been the site of systematic civil rights violations?" This is not the appropriate venue for— "With respect, Your Honor." James Crawford interrupted, his public defender's voice cutting through the tension. "This is exactly the appropriate venue. This is a court of law. This is where justice is supposed to happen. And if it's been failing to happen here, then we need to address that right now in front of everyone on the record." Harrison looked around the courtroom, seeing perhaps for the first time the cameras, the phones, the witnesses who would never let this moment be buried or forgotten. "Court is in recess," he said abruptly. "Indefinitely. Dr. Morgan, please seek medical attention. We'll reconvene when—" "Your Honor, I don't need a recess. I need a commitment." Celeste's voice carried the weight of 23 years of fighting corruption. "I need you to go on record right now stating that you will cooperate fully with the federal investigation into this courthouse. I need you to preserve all records, all security footage, all complaints filed against courthouse personnel. I need you to recuse yourself from any cases involving Chief Tanner or his associates. And I need you to do it now, while the world is watching." Harrison's face went from pale to red. "You're asking me to—" "I'm not asking, Your Honor. I'm telling you what the law requires. Obstruction of a federal investigation is a felony. Tampering with evidence is a felony. Failure to preserve relevant documents is a felony. So unless you want to join Chief Tanner in federal custody, I suggest you make your position very clear." The livestream viewer count hit 1.3 million. Harrison took a long breath, his hands gripping the edge of the bench. "The court commits to full cooperation with any and all federal investigations into courthouse operations. All relevant records will be preserved. I will recuse myself from related cases pending review." "Thank you, Your Honor. Please ensure that statement is entered into the court record." Celeste turned to leave, but Patricia Chen stood up, her voice clear and strong. "Dr. Morgan, the legal community in Atlanta owes you an apology. Many of us have known about these abuses for years. We've whispered about them in hallways, warned our clients, tried to work around the corruption. But we didn't speak up. We didn't fight. We let this continue because it was easier than risking our careers. I'm sorry. We're all sorry." A dozen other lawyers in the gallery stood up, nodding, some with tears in their eyes. "Sorry isn't enough," Celeste said, but her voice was gentle. "Sorry is a starting point. Action is what matters now. If you really want to make this right, then document everything you've witnessed. Testify when you're called. Stand up for your clients when they're mistreated. Be the lawyers you promised to be when you took your oaths." She walked out of the courtroom to thunderous applause through the hallway, packed with supporters, past Morrison, who was processing Tanner's arrest paperwork, his face grim with the knowledge that his department was about to be torn apart. Outside the courthouse, 500 people had become 2,000. They filled the steps, spilled onto the street, blocked traffic in all directions. When Celeste emerged through the main doors, the crowd erupted into cheers so loud they echoed off the surrounding buildings. Marcus Johnson was there, having rushed down from the courtroom. He helped steady Celeste as she descended the steps, her ribs screaming with every movement. "You need a hospital," he said urgently. "I need to speak to these people first." "Dr. Morgan. They came here for Justice Marcus. The least I can do is acknowledge that." A makeshift podium had been set up at the base of the courthouse steps, surrounded by news cameras from every major network. Celeste approached it slowly, and the crowd quieted, 2,000 people holding their collective breath. She looked out at the sea of faces, black, white, Latino, Asian, young, old, rich, poor, all united by a hunger for something that had been denied too long. "My name is Dr. Celeste Morgan," she began, her voice amplified by the microphone. "This morning, I came to this courthouse to attend a hearing about systematic abuse by courthouse security. Instead, I was assaulted, brutalized, and detained unlawfully by the very officers I was investigating." The crowd roared in response, anger and solidarity mixing in the air like smoke. "But I want to be very clear about something. What happened to me today is not special. It's not unique. It happens every single day in courthouses, police stations, and jails across this country. The only difference is that I had a federal badge and cameras were watching. Most victims don't have either." She paused, letting that truth sink in. "So yes, Chief Royce Tanner will face justice for what he did to me. But that's not enough. We need to ensure that every victim of his abuse gets justice too. Every person he brutalized, every case he corrupted, every life he destroyed, all of it needs to be investigated, documented, and prosecuted. And that's exactly what's going to happen." Sarah Williams pushed forward with her microphone. "Dr. Morgan, can you confirm that there will be a federal investigation into the Atlanta courthouse system?" "I can confirm that, as of 1 hour ago, the U.S. Attorney's Office has opened a formal civil rights investigation into courthouse operations. Federal agents will be arriving tomorrow to begin reviewing records, interviewing witnesses, and collecting evidence. Anyone who has been victimized by courthouse security or personnel can report their experiences through a hotline we're establishing. Your testimony matters. Your truth matters. And we will listen." The questions came rapid fire after that, from a dozen different reporters. But Celeste's vision was starting to blur at the edges, her body finally beginning to shut down from the trauma and pain. Marcus noticed and stepped in his hand on her shoulder. "That's all for now, folks. Dr. Morgan needs medical attention. There will be more opportunities for questions in the coming days." An ambulance had been waiting on standby, and paramedics rushed forward with a stretcher. Celeste wanted to refuse it to walk to the ambulance under her own power, but her legs were no longer reliably following orders. She let them help her onto the stretcher, and as they loaded her into the ambulance, she could hear the crowd starting to chant again. "Justice for Morgan. Justice for all. Justice for Morgan. Justice for all." The ambulance doors closed, muffling the sound, but not silencing it. Even as they pulled away, sirens wailing, Celeste could see through the back window that the crowd wasn't dispersing. If anything, it was growing larger, spreading outward like a living organism, transforming from a protest into a movement. At Grady Memorial Hospital, word of her arrival had preceded her. Doctors and nurses lined up to help, their faces showing a mixture of professional concern and personal outrage. The attending physician, Dr. Rachel Kim, was a woman in her 40s who'd clearly seen the live stream. 3 fractured ribs, she announced after examining X-rays. Severe facial contusions, possible orbital fracture, and soft tissue damage throughout. You're lucky he didn't puncture a lung. Luck had nothing to do with it, Celeste said. Tanner's been beating people for 30 years. He knows exactly how hard to hit to inflict maximum pain without causing obvious fatal damage. It's a skill you develop with practice. Dr. Kim's jaw tightened. I've treated a lot of his practice sessions over the years. Never knew who to report it to. Report it to me now. I want statements from every medical professional who's treated victims of courthouse security violence. Names, dates, injuries. Everything you can remember. You'll have it by tomorrow. They admitted Celeste for observation, giving her a private room that immediately became a command center. Her team from the Justice Department arrived within hours. 6 investigators carrying laptops and file boxes ready to coordinate the operation that had been months in planning. Special Advisor Lisa Chen, the woman who'd called from the White House, Celeste's former partner from the Ferguson investigation, was the first through the door. She took one look at Celeste's face and had to sit down. Jesus, Celeste. I watched it happen live and I still can't believe... Jesus. I'm fine, Lisa. But we need to move fast. Tanner's people are going to start destroying evidence the moment they realize how serious this is. Already on it. Federal agents executed search warrants at the courthouse, Tanner's home, and the homes of 3 judges we've been monitoring. We seized computers, phones, filing cabinets, everything. And we've got 2 officers ready to flip. They're terrified and willing to testify in exchange for reduced sentences. Celeste smiled, despite the pain it caused her split lip. Which officers? Murphy and Daniels, the ones who arrested you. They've been documenting Tanner's abuses for 6 months, apparently. Kept records, secretly recorded conversations, everything. They were too scared to come forward, but after today, they're more scared of going down with him. Smart choice on their part. What about Judge Harrison? Lawyered up within an hour, but his attorney is already talking cooperation. Harrison knows his career is over either way. His only hope is to minimize prison time by giving us everyone else. Over the next 3 days, while Celeste recovered in the hospital, the investigation exploded into something unprecedented in scale and scope. Federal agents descended on Atlanta like an occupying army armed with subpoenas and search warrants. They raided the offices of corrupt judges, seized files from the DA's office, froze bank accounts connected to payoff schemes that had been running for decades. The evidence they uncovered was staggering. Tanner had been running the courthouse security operation like a criminal enterprise. He'd created a system where certain lawyers paid monthly fees to ensure their clients received favorable treatment, meaning they wouldn't be brutalized before their hearings. He'd destroyed evidence in dozens of cases, sometimes for money, sometimes for favors, sometimes just because he could. He'd coerced confessions through torture, fabricated witness statements, and conspired with judges to rig trials. But the worst discoveries were the ones that spoke to the sheer scale of human suffering he'd caused. They found a hidden file in his office, a physical file kept in a locked drawer containing photographs. Tanner had documented his victims over the years, taking pictures of their injuries, like trophies. There were hundreds of photos spanning 3 decades. Broken bones, split lips, black eyes, bloodied faces. Some of the victims were still alive and could be interviewed. Others had died, some from their injuries, some from suicide afterward, some from overdoses that might have been attempts to numb the trauma. Each photograph represented a life destroyed, a family shattered, a piece of justice that had died in darkness. The media coverage was relentless. Every network ran stories about the courthouse scandal. The New York Times published a devastating exposé detailing the systematic corruption. The Washington Post ran profiles of Tanner's victims. CNN broadcast a 2-hour special investigating similar corruption in courthouses across the country. And the protests grew. What started in Atlanta spread like wildfire. Within a week, protests erupted in every major city in America. Hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets demanding accountability for police misconduct, demanding transparency in the justice system, demanding that the badge no longer serve as a shield for brutality. In Chicago, 50,000 marched through downtown. In Los Angeles, protests shut down the courthouse district for 3 days. In New York, Philadelphia, Houston, Phoenix, everywhere, people who'd been silent for too long finally found their voices. Some police departments responded with violence, which only made things worse. Videos of officers attacking peaceful protesters went viral, proving Celeste's point better than any testimony could. The system wasn't broken by accident. It was designed this way, and it would fight to preserve itself. But other officers made a different choice. In Seattle, an entire precinct's worth of officers held a press conference and announced they would no longer follow orders they believed violated citizens' constitutional rights. In Detroit, officers formed a new union specifically dedicated to reform and accountability. In Miami, a group of veteran cops testified before the city council about corruption they'd witnessed but been too afraid to report. The blue wall of silence was cracking, and light was flooding through the gaps. Celeste watched it all from her hospital bed, coordinating investigations, reviewing evidence, preparing testimony. Her ribs healed slowly, but her resolve only strengthened. On the 8th day after the assault, she was released from the hospital. A crowd of supporters met her at the entrance, holding signs that read, "Justice for all," and "Thank you, Dr. Morgan," and "The badge doesn't make you above the law." She addressed them briefly, her voice still raspy from the injuries, but gaining strength. "This is not about me," she told them. "This is about every person who's been brutalized by a system that was supposed to protect them. This is about changing that system so thoroughly that what happened to me can never happen again. And we're just getting started." 2 weeks later, Celeste stood before the Senate Judiciary Committee in Washington, D.C. Her face still showing fading bruises, her testimony broadcast to 50 million Americans watching at home. Senator Patricia Rodriguez, the committee chair, opened the hearing with words that would be quoted in history books. "Dr. Morgan, what happened to you in that Atlanta courthouse shocked the conscience of this nation. But as your investigation has revealed, it was far from unique. You've uncovered a pattern of systematic abuse spanning decades involving dozens of officers, judges, and officials. The question before this committee is simple. How do we ensure this never happens again?" Celeste adjusted the microphone, her eyes scanning the packed hearing room, the cameras, the reporters, the citizens who'd traveled from across the country to witness this moment. "Senator Rodriguez, members of the committee, the answer isn't simple, but it is clear. We need federal legislation establishing independent oversight of all courthouse security operations. We need mandatory reporting of all use-of-force incidents. We need to eliminate qualified immunity for officers who violate clearly established constitutional rights. We need a national database of officers terminated for misconduct so they can't simply move to another jurisdiction and continue abusing people. And we need significant penalties for jurisdictions that fail to comply." She spoke for 2 hours, presenting evidence, citing cases, naming names. She detailed the corruption they'd uncovered in Atlanta and connected it to similar patterns in other cities. She showed the photographs from Tanner's collection, making senators visibly recoil at the brutality documented in those images. And she made them understand that this wasn't a problem that could be ignored or managed with half measures. "Every day we delay reform," she concluded, "more people are brutalized, more lives are destroyed, more trust in the justice system evaporates. We can't afford to wait. We can't afford to study the problem for another decade. We need action now." The testimony went viral immediately. Within hours, congressional phone lines were flooded with calls from constituents demanding action. Representatives who'd been on the fence about reform legislation suddenly discovered they were passionate supporters. Even conservatives who typically defended law enforcement found themselves unable to justify what the evidence clearly showed. 3 months after Celeste was assaulted in courtroom 3, Royce Tanner's trial began. The federal courthouse in Atlanta was surrounded by barriers and security, but thousands still gathered outside to watch on giant screens the city had erected. The trial was broadcast live every moment available for public consumption. The prosecution's case was devastating. Murphy and Daniels testified about years of abuse they'd witnessed and participated in their voices shaking with shame and fear. Judge Harrison detailed the corrupt bargains, the rigged cases the justice sold to the highest bidder. Victims took the stand one after another, telling stories of brutality so horrific that jurors wept openly. And then there was the video. The prosecution played the live stream of Celeste's assault, all of it unedited in excruciating detail. The courtroom watched Tanner's face as he struck. Celeste watched him mock her credentials, watched him order his officers to drag her away. Some of the jurors closed their eyes, unable to watch. Others stared at Tanner, their expressions hardening with each passing second. Tanner's defense attorney tried everything. He argued that Tanner was just doing his job, that he had reason to believe the credentials were fake, that he used only necessary force. But the video didn't lie. The evidence didn't lie. The mountain of testimony from dozens of witnesses didn't lie. On the 14th day of trial, the jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the forewoman was a black woman in her 60s, a retired teacher whose grandson had been beaten by police in Birmingham. She looked directly at Tanner as she read the verdict. On the charge of violating civil rights under color of law, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. People cheered, cried, embraced strangers. Outside, the crowd's roar could be heard blocks away. On the charge of assault on a federal officer, we find the defendant guilty. More cheers. Tanner sat motionless, his face blank. On the charge of obstruction of justice, we find the defendant guilty. The forewoman continued through all 17 counts. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Every single charge. When she finished, the judge banged his gavel for order, but it took 5 minutes for the celebration to quiet enough for him to speak. Royce Tanner. The judge said, his voice heavy with the weight of justice finally delivered. You have been found guilty on all counts. Sentencing will be in 30 days, but I want to be clear. You face a minimum of 25 years in federal prison. You used your badge to terrorize, brutalize, and oppress people for 3 decades. You corrupted the very institution meant to deliver justice. And now you will face the consequences of those choices. Tanner was led away in handcuffs, and this time there was no defiance in his posture. Just the hunched, defeated shuffle of a man who'd finally learned that the rules applied to him too. Celeste watched from the gallery, Marcus Johnson sitting beside her, tears streaming down both their faces. Justice, Marcus whispered. After all these years. Finally, justice. But Celeste knew the truth. This verdict was justice for her, for Tanner's identified victims, for the people brave enough to testify. Real justice would require changing the system that created Royce Tanner. It would require ensuring no one ever wielded that kind of unchecked power again. And that fight was just beginning. The sentencing hearing came on a gray morning in late autumn, the kind of day where the sky hangs low and heavy, like it's bearing witness to something momentous. Celeste arrived at the courthouse early, the same building where she'd been assaulted 6 months ago. But everything had changed. The security officers who'd once sneered at citizens now stood with careful professionalism, their eyes downcast, knowing they were being watched by cameras installed at every entrance, every hallway, every corner where abuse had once flourished in shadow. The metal detectors were still there, but now they were operated by federal marshals instead of Tanner's cronies. The line moved efficiently, respectfully. An elderly black woman with a walker passed through without harassment, without humiliation, without fear. She caught Celeste's eye and nodded a small gesture that carried the weight of gratitude and validation. Courtroom 3 was packed beyond capacity with overflow crowds watching on screens in adjacent rooms. Marcus Johnson sat in the front row next to his nephew Deshaun, now 20, and studying pre-law at Morehouse College. Sarah Williams was there with her repaired phone, still documenting everything. Patricia Chen and James Crawford sat together, part of a new coalition of lawyers who'd formed an accountability task force. The little boy who'd cried during Celeste's assault sat with his mother, older now by half a year, but carrying memories that would shape him forever. Judge Harrison was gone, his resignation accepted as part of a plea agreement that would see him testify against 12 other judges in exchange for avoiding prison time. In his place sat Judge Angela Washington, a black woman in her 50s who'd spent 20 years as a public defender before being appointed to the bench. Her first act as presiding judge had been to establish a victims' rights protocol for her courtroom. Her second had been to order a complete audit of every case Tanner had been involved with over 3 decades. Tanner was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit. His hands and feet shackled, his face gaunt from 6 months in federal detention. The man who'd walked with such arrogance through these halls now shuffled like a ghost, his eyes fixed on the floor, unable to meet the gaze of the hundreds of people who'd come to witness his reckoning. Judge Washington didn't waste time with preliminaries. Mr. Tanner, you have been convicted of 17 federal crimes, including civil rights violations, assault on a federal officer, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to deprive citizens of constitutional rights, and witness tampering. Before I impose sentence, I want to hear from your victims. This court will bear witness to the harm you've caused. One by one they came forward. A man whose jaw Tanner had broken for asking why he was being detained. A woman who'd been sexually assaulted during a search, her complaints dismissed and buried. A teenager who'd been choked unconscious for having his phone out. Parents whose son had died from internal bleeding after Tanner beat him in a holding cell. The death ruled an accident, the investigation buried. 23 victims spoke, some with rage, others with quiet dignity, all with the truth that had been silenced for too long. When they finished, Judge Washington turned to Tanner. Do you have anything to say before sentence is imposed? Tanner's attorney whispered urgently in his ear, but Tanner shook his head and stood slowly. I was just doing my job, he said, his voice hoarse and defensive. I kept that courthouse safe for 30 years. I protected judges, lawyers, citizens from dangerous criminals. Maybe I was rough sometimes, but these people, they don't understand what it's like on the front lines. They don't know what we deal with every day. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the courtroom. Even now, faced with overwhelming evidence and unanimous conviction, Tanner couldn't accept responsibility. Judge Washington's expression hardened. Mr. Tanner, you just heard 23 people describe how you tortured them, how you violated their constitutional rights, how you destroyed their lives and the lives of their families. And your response is that you were doing your job. She leaned forward, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. Your job was to protect people, not terrorize them. Your job was to uphold the law, not corrupt it. Your job was to serve justice, not obstruct it at every turn. She opened a folder containing victim impact statements from people who couldn't attend. I have 147 additional statements here. Letters from people you brutalized, families you destroyed, lives you ruined. Some of these people are dead now. Some killed themselves because they couldn't live with the trauma you inflicted. Others died from their injuries. Many more live with permanent disabilities, chronic pain, psychological damage that will never fully heal. Tanner's face had gone pale. You asked these people to understand what it's like on the front lines, Washington continued. But you were never on any front line, Mr. Tanner. You were a predator, hiding behind a badge, using the authority granted to you by the people to abuse those same people. You are the very thing our justice system was designed to prevent. She closed the folder with finality. Royce Tanner, I hereby sentence you to 37 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. You will serve this sentence in general population, without any special accommodations or protections typically afforded to former law enforcement. You wanted to know what it's like to be powerless in a system designed to crush you. Now you'll have decades to find out. The courtroom erupted in applause that Judge Washington didn't attempt to silence. She let it continue for a full minute. Let the sound of justice finally delivered wash over everyone who'd waited so long to hear it. As Tanner was led away, he looked at Celeste for the first time since the trial began. His eyes held something she'd seen in hundreds of corrupt officers over her career. Not remorse, not understanding, but rage at being held accountable. The fury of a man who'd believed himself untouchable, discovering too late that he wasn't. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had swelled to thousands, but this time they weren't angry or fearful. They were celebrating, crying, embracing strangers who understood what this moment meant. A street artist was already at work on the courthouse wall, painting a mural of Celeste's face above the words, "Justice is not a slogan." Similar murals had been appearing in cities across the country. In Ferguson, a massive portrait showed Celeste standing with Michael Brown's mother. In Baltimore, artists depicted her testifying before Congress. In Atlanta now, dozens of walls carried her image, not as a hero or a savior, but as a symbol of resistance, of refusing to be silent, of standing up, even when the cost was blood and pain. Celeste stood on the courthouse steps, watching the celebration, and Lisa Chen appeared beside her. "We got word from Congress," Lisa said quietly. "The Civil Rights Enforcement Act passed the Senate this morning, 67 votes. It's going to the president's desk tomorrow." The legislation they'd fought for, comprehensive reform, requiring independent oversight of all law enforcement agencies, eliminating qualified immunity for constitutional violations, establishing a national misconduct database, mandating transparency in use of force incidents, was about to become law. "How many Republicans voted for it?" Celeste asked. 15, more than we hoped for. Turns out when enough citizens flood the phone lines demanding accountability, even the most resistant legislators find their principles. A young woman pushed through the crowd wearing the uniform of the Atlanta Police Department. She couldn't have been more than 25, her face determined despite obvious nervousness. "Dr. Morgan, I'm Officer Jennifer Santos. I graduated from the academy 3 months ago." She swallowed hard. "I wanted to thank you. When I joined the force, I thought I was signing up to protect people. But in training, they taught us different. They taught us that everyone is a potential threat, that hesitation gets you killed, that we're soldiers in a war zone. They taught us to see citizens as enemies." Celeste saw tears forming in the young officer's eyes. "But after what happened to you, after the investigations, after everything that came out, things started changing. The old guard started getting pushed out. New leadership came in. They completely restructured training. Now we learn de-escalation first, force last. We learn constitutional rights. We learn that our job is to serve, not to dominate." "That's good to hear, Officer Santos. But training is just the beginning. The real test is what you do when no one's watching. When your fellow officers are doing something wrong and you have to choose between speaking up and being accepted." "I know." Santos straightened her shoulders. "Last week I reported a senior officer for using excessive force during an arrest. He was angry, told me I betrayed the Blue family, said I'd never be trusted again. But 3 other young officers backed me up. We filed a formal complaint together. The officer was suspended pending investigation." Celeste felt something in her chest loosen a tension she'd carried for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "You did the right thing. That took courage. You showed us what courage looks like, ma'am. You stood up even when you knew what it would cost. Now it's our turn." Santos wasn't alone. Across the country, young officers were making similar choices. In Phoenix, 23 rookie cops signed a letter demanding their department fire a veteran officer caught on video planting evidence. In Philadelphia, new recruits walked out of a training session when an instructor taught them how to falsify reports. In Denver, a group of patrol officers formed a whistleblower network, creating a secure system for reporting misconduct anonymously. The old guard fought back, of course. Police unions denounced the reforms. Conservative media outlets ran segments about how the new restrictions would make officers hesitate in life-or-death situations. Some departments saw mass retirements as veteran officers chose to leave rather than accept accountability. But something fundamental had shifted. The protests that followed Celeste's assault had evolved into a sustained movement. Organizers who'd met in the streets of Atlanta now coordinated across cities, sharing tactics, supporting each other's campaigns, building power at local and national levels. They packed city council meetings, ran candidates for office, pushed for civilian review boards with real authority. In Memphis, activists successfully recalled a mayor who'd protected corrupt officers. In Seattle, a ballot initiative passed, giving citizens the power to investigate police misconduct independently. In Dallas, the police chief was fired and replaced with a reformer who'd spent 20 years studying community policing in other countries. The changes weren't universal, and they weren't easy. There were setbacks, backlash moments when it felt like the old system would reassert itself through sheer inertia. But the footage of Celeste's assault playing on loop across every platform remained an indelible reminder of what unchecked power looked like. No one could unsee it. No one could pretend it was isolated or exaggerated. 6 months after Tanner's sentencing, Celeste stood in the Oval Office as the president signed the Civil Rights Enforcement Act into law. Marcus Johnson was there, Deshaun beside him. Sarah Williams covered it for the National Press Pool. Patricia Chen and James Crawford represented the legal community that had found its conscience. The families of Tanner's victims filled the room, their presence a testament to survival and the long road to healing. The president, a moderate who'd been lukewarm on police reform until public pressure became impossible to ignore, made a speech about American values and justice for all. Celeste listened politely, knowing that laws alone wouldn't change everything, that implementation would be a battle, that the real work still lay ahead. But when the president handed her the signing pen, their eyes met, and she saw something there she'd rarely seen in politicians: genuine respect mixed with a hint of fear. Fear of what the people could do when they finally decided they'd had enough. That night, Celeste returned to her modest apartment in Washington, D.C., her body still aching from injuries that would probably never fully heal. She made tea, sat by the window overlooking the city, and allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. Her phone buzzed constantly with congratulatory messages, interview requests, invitations to speak at universities and conferences. She ignored most of them, too tired to engage with the machinery of fame that had grown up around her story. But one message caught her attention. No sender name, no number. Just a text that appeared on her screen like a ghost. Congratulations on your victory. But you should know the network you exposed in Atlanta is just one branch. The corruption goes deeper than you've discovered, higher than you've looked. There are powerful people who let Tanner operate because he was useful to them. Some of them are relieved he's gone, one less loose end to worry about. You've won a battle, Dr. Morgan. But the war isn't over. They're watching you. Be careful. The message disappeared even as she stared at it, some kind of auto-delete feature erasing it from her phone completely. Celeste sat very still, her tea growing cold in her hands. She thought about Judge Harrison's plea deal, how quickly he'd given up names. She thought about the DA who'd resigned without fighting, the police captain who'd taken early retirement, the city councilman who'd suddenly decided not to run for re-election. All of them cutting deals, cooperating, but maybe not telling everything. Maybe protecting someone higher up the chain. Her mind went to the settlement money she'd discovered during the investigation, millions of taxpayer dollars paid out to cover up police brutality. That money had been approved by someone, authorized by someone with real power. And they were still out there, still operating, still corrupt. But instead of fear, Celeste felt something else. A familiar burning in her chest, the same fire that had driven her through 23 years of fighting corruption. If anything, the anonymous warning only confirmed what she'd always known, that this work was never finished, that every victory revealed new battles, that the price of justice was eternal vigilance. She picked up her phone and called Lisa Chen. "I just got a message," Celeste said when Lisa answered. "Anonymous. Warning me that the corruption goes deeper than what we uncovered." Lisa was quiet for a moment. "You think it's credible?" "I think it's inevitable. Tanner didn't operate in a vacuum. Someone protected him. Someone benefited from his corruption. And whoever they are, they're still out there. So what do you want to do? Celeste looked out her window at the lights of Washington, D.C. The monuments to democracy glowing in the darkness. Beautiful lies carved in marble, hiding the ugly truths of how power really worked. I want to find them. I want to expose them. I want to keep fighting until there's nowhere left for corruption to hide. Lisa laughed, a sound of exhausted admiration. You just went through hell, Celeste. You got beaten, you spent months testifying, you just got major legislation passed. Don't you want to rest? Take some time. Maybe let someone else carry the torch for a while. Rest. Celeste touched her ribs, still tender, 6 months later. Lisa, I've been resting my whole life compared to the people who live under the boot of corrupt systems every single day. The woman who got shoved at the courthouse steps because she had a walker, she doesn't get to rest. The teenager who gets stopped and frisked on his way to school every morning, he doesn't get to rest. The single mother working 3 jobs who gets her wages stolen by her employer because she's too scared to report it, she doesn't get to rest. You're right. I know you're right. Besides, Celeste continued, her voice softening, I can't stop now. Not when people are finally paying attention. Not when real change is actually possible. Not when there are young officers like Jennifer Santos making different choices because they saw what happens when you stand up. This is the moment, Lisa. This is when we push harder, not when we ease up. They talked for another hour, planning next steps, identifying targets, mapping out an investigation that would take them into even more dangerous territory. When Celeste finally hung up, it was past midnight. She walked to her bookshelf and pulled out a worn photo album. Inside were pictures from 23 years of cases. Victims she'd fought for, families she'd helped, officers she'd brought to justice. Some of the people in these photos were dead now. Others had rebuilt their lives. All of them had taught her something about the cost of corruption and the price of accountability. The last page of the album held a newspaper clipping from her first case, a police shooting in Birmingham that everyone said was clean until Celeste proved it wasn't. The officer had been convicted, the family had gotten justice, and a young federal investigator named Celeste Morgan had learned that the system could be changed if you were willing to fight hard enough and long enough. Beside the clipping, she'd taped a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. She'd always loved that quote, but now she understood it differently. The arc didn't bend on its own. People bent it. People like Marcus Johnson, who testified even when it was terrifying. People like Sarah Williams, who kept filming even when her phone got smashed. People like Patricia Chen and James Crawford, who found their courage when it mattered most. People like Officer Jennifer Santos, who chose principle over belonging. And people like Celeste herself, who walked into a courthouse knowing exactly what would happen, willing to endure it, because exposure was the only antiseptic powerful enough to kill the infection of corruption. She closed the album and returned it to the shelf, then walked to her window one more time. Outside, the city slept, but she knew that somewhere out there, other investigators were working late. Other activists were planning protests. Other victims were finding the courage to come forward. The movement she'd helped ignite was growing, spreading, becoming something larger than any individual. In New York, a teenager was posting footage of a police stop to social media documenting everything. In Los Angeles, a public defender was filing a motion to dismiss charges based on evidence of police misconduct. In Chicago, a mother was teaching her son to record every interaction with police, to know his rights, to never accept that injustice was normal. And in Atlanta, on the wall, where an artist had painted Celeste's face, someone had added new words in fresh paint. Once justice awakens, it never sleeps again. Celeste smiled, feeling the truth of those words in her bones. The anonymous message had been right about one thing: the war wasn't over. It might never be over. There would always be people who sought power without accountability, who valued dominance over service, who believed the badge made them above the law. But now, those people knew something they'd forgotten: the citizens they abused were watching, recording, organizing, fighting back. And every victory, no matter how small, proved that change was possible. That corruption could be exposed. That justice, though delayed and difficult, and bought with blood and pain, was still achievable. Celeste thought about Tanner sitting in a prison cell, finally powerless, finally subject to the same brutal system he'd inflicted on others. She thought about the Civil Rights Enforcement Act, imperfect but significant, a tool that activists could use to pry open closed systems. She thought about the young officers choosing differently, the old guard being forced out, the culture slowly shifting towards something that might actually resemble justice. And she thought about tomorrow, when she'd wake up and start investigating whoever had sent that message, whoever was still hiding in the shadows, whoever thought they could escape accountability just because they were powerful. Because that was the lesson Atlanta had taught America: no one was too powerful to face justice. No corruption was too entrenched to expose. No system was too broken to fix. It would take time. It would take sacrifice. It would take thousands of people making brave choices in small moments and large ones. But it was possible. And that possibility, that hope, that fire once ignited, it never died. It just spread. From courthouse to courthouse, city to city, heart to heart, until the whole country burned with it. Until justice wasn't just a word carved on buildings, but a living, breathing force that demanded accountability from everyone who wielded power in its name. Until the badge meant service again, not domination. Until the courtroom meant fairness again, not corruption. Until America meant justice again, not just for some, but for all. Celeste turned from the window, ready for tomorrow's fight, carrying the fire that would never die. Because she'd learned the most important truth of all: justice didn't happen because people hoped for it. Justice happened because people fought for it, bled for it, refused to accept anything less than it. And once enough people refused to accept injustice, the whole system had to change. Or burn. And Celeste Morgan was fine with either outcome.